Darren and I were recently at some agronomy training, and one of the things the trainers were talking about all day long was overlapping residuals. What that means is you start with a residual herbicide down, usually pre-emerge, and then before that residual runs out, you throw another residual herbicide out there. The reason why they're suggesting that you do this is because we're having so many problems with resistant weeds. So the idea was it's a lot easier to kill some of these weeds before they get up, and we can do that if we've got two different residual modes of action out there.
The big key here is you want to have effective modes of action. So you don't want to have, hey, I get ALS resistant weeds and I'm going to use Authority first or Authority assist. And you say, well, I've got two different modes of action there. No, you have one, because the other one is ineffective on your weeds. So you have to kind of keep those things in mind. Then when we're looking at different residuals, when are you putting them out there? In different areas of the country, this is going to vary a little bit. When you move further north in the Corn Belt, where we're at, the frost is just coming out of the ground. We're out in the fields, we get some herbicide on, and we're planting almost right away. When you move further south, guys say, well, I may need to start with residuals out in February because I've got some weed flushes coming and I'm not going to be planting for a while yet. I don't want to have to spray Roundup every other day or Liberty or Gramoxone or something else to burn down the weeds that are coming up. I get that, but we have to look at during that cropping season, we have to have enough residual to get us until we get to crop canopy and a little beyond. When we're doing this, we can't rely on the same mode of action just over and over and over again. And I see a lot of the pre-emerge herbicides now with group 15s in them for soybeans. That's fine, but think about what additional residuals we're going to put on later in the season. Oftentimes it's more of group 15s.
Let's start with this. If you're in an area where you might need a burn down way before you plant and then another burn down right when you plant, that's an area where you should be considering cover crops. That's the reason why we're standing in a cover crop field today. After wheat harvest, cover crops are put on this ground, and hey, if this was going to be a spring crop, they wouldn't get killed off until the spring, unless of course winter kill was to do it for them. But the point is, if you could have a cover crop that grew over the course of the winter into the spring, that could help hold your weeds down, and that might be something to consider in your area. It all depends on your geography. But let's come back to what Darren said a little bit ago about these soybean residual herbicides. Let's just talk about a very specific plan of action for soybeans. What we encourage you to do is right before you plant the beans, use 3 different modes of action if you're having problems with resistant weeds. We want you to use a yellow, that would be Treflan, Sonaline, or Prowl, plus Metribuzin, plus one of the PPOs, either Authority or Valor, not Sharpen. Sharpen doesn't give you enough residual. We can't use a high enough rate in soybeans, otherwise we're going to hurt the soybeans. So we want you to use either Valor or Authority. So you got 3 different modes of action there pre, then early post-emerge, like what Darren's talking about, you can follow with a group 15. What he means by that is Outlook, Warrant, Dual, one of those types of products.
Well, a lot of times in the mix, we also have an ALS type product. And you say, okay, well, wait a minute. You just said ALS resistance is a big deal. It is with certain weeds. With other weeds, it's not. I like using products like First Rate, Pursuit, those kinds of things that do have some residual to them. I like using them in my post-emerge mix.
If
so that
you have
may
the
be,
right weeds.
Yeah, that may be another thing where you say, you know what, I've got some mare's tail out there that's not ALS resistant. I could add in a First Rate for some help that's also going to give me some residual later on. Or I've got some cockleburs and sunflowers out there. I can put that Pursuit or Raptor out there, control those weeds, and get a little bit of residual for a future flush of some other weeds that may be coming.
Well, the big thing here is right away when we start talking about overlapping residuals, using 3 pre-emerge herbicides, you're going, oh my goodness, don't you guys know that commodity prices are down? Look, I get that. We farm too. But here's what I do know. Weeds are a terrible, terrible issue if you've got very many of them at all. It does not take many weeds to dramatically hurt your yield. And by dramatically, I'm talking 3 to 5 bushels. And you might say, well, 3 to 5 bushels doesn't sound dramatic. To me, it is, because that's a lot of lost dollars in soybeans. And we can easily afford to throw an extra herbicide out there or 2 for 3 to 5 bushel yield loss. So our point is, hey, start with one of these good residual herbicide programs, the 3 pre's like we're talking about. You can even follow with, let's say, Warrant. You can do all that stuff for maybe 25 bucks an acre. Do you know what it costs to go with 1 shot of Cobra to try to rescue your Palmer pigweed or your water hemp or kochia? It's going to cost you 20 bucks. So why wouldn't you just put $20 out there for the 3 pre's And then if you need to, you can follow with another, whatever it is, $7 approximately for a warrant, something like that, if you need to. Well, you're investing similar money and you're gonna have way better weed control than trying to go out and rescue this disaster with one shot of Cobra that's going to burn the beans and not kill the weeds. And I just want you to understand, Cobra is a fine product when it's used appropriately. So if I've got a good residual program out there and I have a few weed escapes and I kill the weeds when they're 2 to 4 inches tall, Cobra is fine. But the point is, Cobra is not a complete treatment.
Just want to make a comment on the corn side too. We see many guys using cut rate pre's in front of corn, and we're having a lot of weed issues this year in corn. And you say, wow, what's going on in corn? I thought we could do a good job.
But wait a second, it all depends on what you're talking about here. If we're talking Roundup Ready corn, you're gonna go spray Roundup to kill the grass, fine. Then I'm real big on, hey, let's switch it up. What are we using for herbicide? So maybe instead of using a straight harness, we're gonna switch over to Verdict. We're gonna use Balance Flex. We're gonna do something that's got good broadleaf activity on the #1 target weed we're after, like as Darren was mentioning, Palmer pigweed or water hemp or whatever your #1 target is. But there are a lot of guys going into next year that are looking at conventional corn. Then it's a whole different deal. We do not want you using Verdict. We don't want you using Balance Flex. We don't want you using any of these products that are combinations of grass and broadleaf killers. Use the straight grass killer at the full rate, and if you want to spike in a broadleaf killer like a Balance Flex at a lower rate or a Sharpen at a lower rate, fine. But the point is, in conventional corn, we don't have the great rescue option of Roundup or Liberty, something like that. All we have is $25 of Axim.
And as usual, I was looking at it the exact opposite way of, hey, instead of just putting that low rate broadleaf herbicide out, you could spike in some more grass herbicide. Brian says, take your grass herbicide and spike in broadleaf. It's the same thing. We're just getting a good, strong rate of grass herbicides.
If you need that broadleaf herbicide, and that's the whole point of our discussion today, is if you're in an area where you're having problems with resistant weeds or just flat out general weed control, we want you to consider using overlapping residuals. So start with a residual herbicide on your target weed, follow with a different mode of action residual on your target weed later on.
The question is, though, is that the right strategy to control our weed of the week? Can you identify this week's weed?